Please subscribe and share for more story. The sound wasn't loud, yet it sliced through the apartment like a warning from the universe, a dry, brittle crack that echoed down the empty hallway. Helen Carver froze. For a heartbeat, she didn't understand what had happened. The world hovered in silence as she stared at her arm, now bent at an unnatural angle against her floral blouse. No scream came. Shock sealed her voice, wrapping her in a cold stillness. She looked up at Rowan, her son, her pride once, her joy once, now standing there with his hands still raised as if the moment were suspended in midair. Behind him, Brielle stopped her shrieking. Her mouth hung open, not in concern but in fear that things had spiraled beyond the web she had spun. The pain arrived like fire, white, sharp, blinding, racing from her shoulder to her eyes and driving her to her knees. As she gasped, tasting metal and disbelief, one truth carved itself into her chest. Her son had just broken her for money. To understand how Helen Carver ended up kneeling on the polished floor of her apartment with a fractured arm caused by her own child, one had to understand the slow, invisible erosion that had worn her down over the past year. Helen had always defined herself by two roles: Henry's wife and Rowan's mother. When Henry died 4 years earlier from a sudden aneurysm, half of her life evaporated in a breath. She was left alone in a large Victorian house in Savannah, full of memories, but impossible to maintain. At 64, with arthritis creeping into her joints and a fixed income that barely stretched far enough, she made the painful decision to sell the house. It's not giving up, she had told herself. It's choosing peace. And for a brief moment, peace seemed within reach. The sale brought in $400,000 after the mortgage was settled. Helen planned to use it for medical expenses, emergencies, and a little comfort in her old age. But the moment Rowan and Brielle learned about the money, the tone of their voices changed. What they saw wasn't her security, it was their opportunity. What she saw as survival, they saw as inheritance she was withholding. Rowan and Brielle had never managed money well, though they dressed their struggles in excuses and bright smiles. Rowan hopped between freelance design jobs, always chasing a big break, always close but never quite arriving. Brielle worked part-time at an upscale salon, her wardrobe more expensive than her paycheck could defend. Together they lived above their means, leased luxury cars, dinners at trendy restaurants, vacations on credit. Still, Helen helped when she could, telling herself she was being a good mother. A few hundred for a car repair, a little extra for groceries, sometimes a loan they never repaid. Young people have it hard, she'd mutter, comforting herself when her bank account thinned. But everything changed the night she told them the sale money had cleared. They arrived for dinner with forced cheer and sharp intentions. Brielle poured champagne. Rowan pulled out Helen's chair as though he hadn't avoided her for months. The warmth felt staged. The moment they sat down, the lobbying began, disguised as concern. Cash in a savings account is a waste, Brielle said sweetly. Inflation is stealing from you. Rowan leaned in. Mom, I have a business idea. Just $150,000 to start. Helen waited for him to laugh. He didn't. Helen gently refused, choosing her words with the tenderness of a mother trying not to wound. I need security more than I need investments, she said. The air thickened instantly. Brielle's bright smile extinguished like a candle in a storm. Rowan's shoulders stiffened, and a scowl tugged at his mouth. So you don't believe in me? He muttered, hurt blossoming into accusation. Dad would have supported my dreams. Helen felt the blow of that sentence deeper than they knew. Rowan, that money is my retirement. My safety. But her reasoning clattered uselessly against their growing resentment. They left in a storm of slammed doors and accusations. Helen stood in the quiet afterward, wondering when love had become something she had to defend. Then came the daily calls, no longer asking about her, but announcing emergencies. The car will be repossessed, Rowan shouted one morning. Insurance won't cover Brielle's tests, he insisted another day. She caved once, $10,000 to clear their credit card debt. She hoped it would calm them. Instead, it taught them she was a resource they could deplete. Each request sharpened into demand. each demand molded into entitlement. What she saw as generosity, Rowan saw as weakness. Only Nora Ellington, Helen's neighbor of 20 years, noticed the truth. Nora was a retired paralegal with fiery red hair and a personality that could slice through excuses like a knife through warm butter. One afternoon, while they shared iced tea on Helen's balcony, Nora leaned forward. "You're being abused," she said plainly. Helen recoiled. "They're just dressed." "No," Nora said. "They're exploiting you." Helen shook her head, refusing to let the word settle. "They're my family," Nora sighed. "Sometimes family are the ones who hurt you most." Helen wanted to argue, but deep inside, something in her flinched. Yet she still defended Rowan and Brielle, still clung to the belief that this was temporary, that they still loved her. But in the days before the incident, Rowan's tone sharpened to hostility. When Helen refused to give him $50,000 for a cryptocurrency investment, an investment he could barely explain, he hung up on her mid-sentence. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't mourning silence, it was a warning. Nora noticed the tension and insisted Helen carry a small medical alert pendant. "Humor me," Nora said. "If they show up and things feel wrong, press it." Helen laughed then. She wouldn't be laughing soon. 2 days later, while Helen was taking out her trash, Rowan and Brielle appeared in the hallway, eyes wild, energy crackling like broken wires. They hadn't buzzed up. They had followed a delivery driver into the building. "Mom, we need to talk," Rowan said, pushing past her into the apartment. Brielle followed, her boots clicking sharply against the hardwood. Helen closed the door slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. "What is this?" she asked. "We just need you to listen," Brielle snapped, pacing. The argument erupted instantly. "You're ruining our lives," Brielle screamed. "You're hoarding money while we drown." Rowan's voice trembled with desperation. "Just write the check, Mom. Why are you making this so hard?" Helen stepped back, trying to put distance between them. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm calling the police." Brielle lunged for the phone. "You're not calling anyone." Rowan grabbed it first and slid it under the sofa. "Enough," Helen yelled. "Leave my home." She tried to move past Rowan toward the door. That was the moment everything changed. Rowan seized her arm, hard. "You're not going anywhere until we finish this," he shouted, his grip bruisingly tight. Helen twisted, trying to break free, her voice cracking. "Let me go, Rowan." But Rowan, fueled by panic and entitlement, tightened his hold and yanked her back. The motion, his force against her twisting, was too much. The crack echoed through the apartment. Rowan stumbled back, horror dawning on his face as Helen collapsed, her arm bent grotesquely. I didn't mean to," he whispered. Brielle rushed over, not with concern, but calculation in her eyes. "Helen," she said coldly, "look at me. It was an accident. You tripped. You twisted your arm yourself. Right?" Helen stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "Help me," Helen gasped. "I need an ambulance." "No ambulance," Brielle said sharply. "We'll take you. We'll say you fell in the shower." Rowan nodded frantically. "Yeah, Mom. We'll fix this. Come on, stand up." He reached for her again. Helen recoiled, a raw cry escaping her. "Don't touch me." Her scream startled him. Rowan stepped back, trembling. "We have to do something," he murmured to Brielle. "We can't let anyone see her like this." They whispered urgently, planning how to avoid the building staff. But Helen knew something they didn't. Nora's pendant was still in her pocket. Her good hand trembling, Helen slid her fingers into her cardigan pocket and found the small device. A mercy Nora had forced on her. While Rowan and Brielle panicked, she pressed the button. A soft vibration confirmed the alert. She slumped forward, pretending to faint. "She's passing out," Rowan cried. "Mom, wake up." Brielle slapped Helen's cheek lightly. "Helen, we need to move you. We can't stay here," Rowan yelled. "What if someone hears?" Helen stayed still, breathing shallowly, praying Nora was home. Minutes stretched like hours until pounding rattled the front door. Helen Carver, open this door right now." Nora's voice rang out, shrill with urgency. Rowan froze. "Who is that?" Helen forced her eyes open. "The neighbor," she whispered. Brielle's face blanched. "Don't answer it," she hissed. "She'll go away." "Helen!" Nora shouted. "I'm calling the police in 10 seconds. I heard yelling." Rowan's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. He wasn't a monster, just a weak man caught in the consequences of his own madness. He walked to the door and opened it. Nora stormed in like a hurricane, pepper spray in one hand, phone in the other. She took one look at Helen and dialed 911. Police and paramedics flooded the room within minutes. Helen floated in and out of consciousness as morphine dulled her agony. Officers separated Rowan and Brielle for questioning. Helen watched as Rowan was handcuffed in the hallway, tears pouring down his face. "Mom, please tell them it was an accident," he sobbed. Helen looked at the officer standing beside her. "Ma'am," he said, "did you fall?" This was the crossroads. She could lie. She could protect the child she once carried in her arms. She could spare him a felony charge and public shame. Rowan met her gaze, pleading. Brielle glared, waiting to see whether she could still control the story. Helen looked down at her bruised, swollen arm, at the bone that had snapped under her son's hands. She thought of the months of manipulation, the fear, the isolation. "No," she said slowly. "I did not fall. He grabbed me. He wouldn't let me leave. He broke my arm because I wouldn't give him money." The officer nodded grimly. Domestic battery. Unlawful imprisonment. Attempted extortion. Rowan's sobs echoed down the hallway as the elevator door shut, carrying him away. Brielle screamed until officers guided her into a squad car. Helen spent 4 days in the hospital after surgery. A titanium plate and 6 screws held her bone together. Nurses moved gently around her, but she felt hollow, more bruised inside than outside. When she returned home, the silence of her apartment made her chest ache. She hired a home health aide to help her bathe and dress, tasks she couldn't manage one-handed. Nights were the worst. Pain medication dulled her body, but sharpened her thoughts. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Rowan's childhood. His first steps, his graduation, the nights he cried after bad dreams. When had he changed? Had she failed him somewhere? Had love blinded her to the truth? Nora visited daily, bringing soup and fierce encouragement. "Don't you dare blame yourself," Nora said once, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Love isn't weakness." But Helen felt foolish. She had ignored every red flag. She had believed every excuse. Rowan had written letters from jail, letters her lawyer intercepted. "Their apologies mixed with manipulation," he said. Helen didn't read them. She couldn't. Forgiveness and accountability were 2 different things, and she had learned, painfully, where enabling led. The legal process became its own quiet storm. Helen hired Arthur Pelley, an elder law attorney with a sharp mind and sharp pursuits. He handled everything: paperwork, court dates, the restraining order. "You're not speaking to them directly," he instructed. "Not a call, not a text. Every message goes through me." Helen nodded, grateful for the shield. Rowan's letters kept arriving through Arthur. Pleas for forgiveness, claims that he'd lost control, promises to change. "If you withdraw the charges," Arthur told her, "this stops now. If you don't, he faces real consequences." Helen closed her eyes. She could almost hear Rowan as a little boy saying, "Mom, don't be mad." But the vision dissolved into the memory of him grabbing her, twisting her arm, ignoring her screams. "I can't drop the charges," she whispered. "I have to protect myself." Rowan and Brielle eventually accepted plea deals. Rowan received 8 months in county jail with 3 years probation. Brielle, less directly involved, received probation and community service. Their marriage didn't survive the ordeal. Brielle left him 6 months into his sentence. "Love built on dependency never lasts," Nora muttered when she heard the news. Helen didn't celebrate. She didn't grieve. She simply breathed. Once the cast came off, physical therapy began. It was grueling, stretching stiff tendons, learning to lift even the smallest objects again. "Take your time," the therapist encouraged. Your arm will work, but it may never be the same. That truth lingered in Helen's chest. Rainy weather made the bone throb. Heavy lifting became an impossibility. Still, she pushed forward, determined not to shrink into helplessness. Nora often accompanied her to appointments, cracking jokes in the waiting room to keep her spirits up. I swear, Nora said one morning, if I ever see Rowan again, I'll use my pepper spray this time. Helen smiled weakly. Let's hope it never comes to that. Yet beneath her humor, Nora carried fierce protectiveness, an anchor Helen leaned on more than she liked to admit. Each small victory in therapy, raising her arm an inch higher, holding a cup without trembling, became proof she was reclaiming her life. But healing wasn't just physical. The emotional wound ran deeper, sharp and unfamiliar. She had survived betrayal not by strangers, but by the child she once adored. And that required a different kind of strength, one she was only beginning to find. Months passed. Helen found herself seeking purpose beyond her own recovery. One afternoon, while attending a community meeting, she learned about a local women's shelter needing volunteers, especially individuals familiar with elder financial abuse. Something stirred inside her, a calling shaped by pain. She signed up. Her first day was overwhelming. She met women who had been manipulated by children, siblings, caregivers. Some had lost homes, savings, dignity. As they shared their stories, Helen recognized pieces of herself in each of them. I thought love meant giving everything, one woman whispered. Helen placed a hand on hers. Love should never cost your safety. Over time, Helen became a steady presence, helping women open private bank accounts, guiding them through legal forms, offering quiet comfort as they confronted their own losses. She didn't tell her story at first, but eventually during a group session, she found herself speaking. Not with shame, but with clarity. When she finished, several women wiped tears from their eyes. Helen realized she was no longer just healing, she was helping others heal too. And that made the pain feel less like a scar and more like a lesson with purpose. One breezy afternoon, Helen sat on a bench overlooking the river. Cargo ships drifted toward the sea, their slow movement calming her restless thoughts. Nearby, a young mother knelt beside her toddler, who was in the middle of an impressive tantrum. No, sweetheart, the mother said firmly. We're not buying that toy today. The child wailed louder, kicking his feet. The mother didn't yell. She didn't cave. She simply waited, soothing him gently, without surrendering her boundary. When the boy finally quieted, she hugged him, whispering something that made him smile again. Helen watched them for a long time, her chest tight. She saw something she had once misunderstood. Boundaries were love, not denial. Protecting one's own well-being wasn't selfish, it was necessary. She had given Rowan everything without requiring responsibility, and in doing so, she had taught him entitlement instead of gratitude. The realization was painful, but liberating. Helen inhaled deeply, letting the river breeze wash over her. She wasn't perfect, no mother was. But she was learning, growing. And maybe she thought that was enough. In the distance, the sun dipped low, stretching warm colors across the water like a promise of something gentler ahead. Helen hadn't spoken to Rowan since the day he was arrested. She knew from Arthur that he had been released and moved out of state to work construction. Occasionally, guilt whispered to her, an ache that pulsed with old memories. Will you ever talk to him again? Nora asked one evening, handing Helen a cup of chamomile tea. Helen stared at the steam rising from the cup. I don't know, she said truthfully. I still love him, but loving him doesn't mean I have to let him back into my life. Nora nodded. You're allowed to protect yourself, even from family. Helen sighed, feeling both lighter and heavier. She wondered if Rowan blamed her, if he had learned anything, if he thought of her at all. But she knew reaching out now would open the same door she had fought so hard to close. Maybe one day, she murmured. But for now, the door stays locked. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the river. Helen lifted her tea and let its warmth settle her. Healing came in waves, some gentle, some sharp. But every day she held her boundaries, She reclaimed another piece of herself. Despite her progress, some nights Helen found herself awake at 3 a.m., staring into the darkness. Trauma had a strange way of echoing back at unexpected moments. A floorboard creaking, a sudden knock on the door. Even her phone buzzing sometimes made her heartbeat spike. Therapy helped. She attended weekly sessions with a counselor who guided her through the tangled grief not just for what happened, but for who Rowan once was. "You're mourning a living person," her counselor explained gently. "A version of him that no longer exists." The words hurt, but they also freed her. Helen began keeping a journal, pages filled with uncensored thoughts, anger, love, fear, and the slow acceptance that healing wasn't linear. Some days she forgave Rowan in her heart. Other days she felt her chest tighten with resentment. But she kept writing. "Writing doesn't erase pain," her counselor said, "but it teaches your mind that you're safe now." And little by little, a sense of peace returned. Not complete, not perfect, but enough to rise each morning and say, "Today, I am safe. Today, I am me." One afternoon at the women's shelter, Helen met an older woman named Louise, whose daughter had stolen her retirement fund. Louise spoke with shaking hands, blaming herself for trusting her own child. Helen listened patiently, then shared her own story, softly, without dramatics. Louise's eyes widened. "How did you survive it?" she whispered. Helen thought carefully. "By accepting the truth," she said. "And by understanding that protecting myself doesn't mean I stopped loving him." Louise cried, and Helen held her hand. Later that evening, the shelter director pulled Helen aside. "Your presence here changes people," she said. "You don't fix their stories, you help them find strength in them." Helen felt something bloom in her chest, a quiet pride. She had lived through something devastating, yet here she was, turning her wounds into light for others. It didn't erase what Rowan had done, but it gave her pain purpose. And purpose, she realized, was another word for healing. Spring arrived with warm mornings and blossoms covering every street like soft confetti. Helen began taking walks along the river again, enjoying the gentle pull of sunlight on her skin. Her arms still ached occasionally, but she found herself reaching for things more confidently, trusting her body again. One morning, she stopped at a small cafe near the water. The barista, a young woman with curly hair, smiled warmly. "You look familiar," she said. "Do you volunteer at the shelter?" Helen chuckled. "I do. How did you know?" "My grandmother stays there," the girl replied. "She talks about you all the time. Says you're the reason she finally opened a separate bank account." Warmth flooded Helen's chest. She ordered her tea and sat by the window, watching sunlight reflect off the water. For the first time in a long while, she felt something soft and unfamiliar, joy. Not the loud, overwhelming kind, but a gentle settling inside her bones. She had lost much. She had endured worse. But she had also rebuilt herself, brick by brick, breath by breath. One late afternoon, a letter arrived in her mailbox addressed in Rowan's handwriting. Her breath caught, but she didn't open it immediately. Instead, she set it on the kitchen table and made herself tea. Nora noticed it when she visited. "Are you going to read it?" Helen looked at the envelope. "Eventually. Do you want company when you do?" "Yes," Helen admitted. They sat together as Helen opened the letter. Rowan's handwriting trembled. His words were simple. He apologized, not the manipulative apologies of before, but something quieter. He admitted he had been drowning in debt, pride, and shame. He confessed he had hated asking for help but hated the idea of working harder even more. "I was selfish," he wrote. "I hurt you. I can't undo it, but I want to change." Helen folded the letter carefully. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed. "What do you think?" Nora asked. "I think," Helen whispered, "it's a start. But I'm not ready." Nora squeezed her shoulder. "You don't have to be." Summer sunlight shimmered across Helen's balcony as she watered the little herb garden Nora had convinced her to start. Mint, basil, rosemary. Their scents lifted her spirit. She had rebuilt her routines: morning tea, volunteer work, gentle exercise, occasional dinners with Nora. A calm rhythm settled into her days. One weekend, the shelter invited Helen to speak at a fundraising event. Standing at the podium, she saw rows of faces: survivors, donors, volunteers. Her heart raced, but she steadied herself. "My story isn't unique," she began, "but it is mine. And I share it because silence protects the wrong people." The room grew still as she spoke of boundaries, manipulation, and reclaiming dignity. When she finished, the applause was soft but powerful. A few women approached her afterward, thanking her for being brave. Helen didn't feel brave. She felt whole. A version of herself she once thought had disappeared forever. Nora snapped a picture of her beside the podium. "You look strong," she said. "I feel strong," Helen replied. As the months stretched on, Helen noticed how much calmer her home felt. No more sudden knocks or frantic calls. No walking on emotional eggshells. She began decorating, adding warm lights, soft rugs, framed pictures of places she loved. Not of people who hurt her. For the first time, her apartment felt like hers. "It's cozy," Nora remarked during a movie night. "It's safe," Helen corrected softly. Safety, something she'd once taken for granted, was now precious. Helen also began exploring new hobbies. She joined a book club, took painting classes, and even learned how to arrange flowers. One afternoon, she painted a river sunset, a swirl of gold and violet. When she stepped back, she realized she had painted hope. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers again. And that was enough. Helen still thought about Rowan. Love didn't dissolve just because it was wounded. But she no longer felt consumed by what she couldn't change. One day, she told her therapist, "I don't want revenge. I just want peace." "Peace doesn't require reconciliation," the therapist replied gently. "Only acceptance." Helen nodded slowly. She had accepted that Rowan needed to walk his own path, without leaning on her, without hurting her. She also accepted that she deserved boundaries and joy and safety. Sometimes she imagined Rowan knocking on her door. Would she open it? Maybe someday. But not today. Today was for healing. Today was for her. And she chose herself, without guilt. At the shelter, Helen became known as the quiet warrior. Women sought her out for guidance, not because she had all the answers, but because she listened with genuine compassion. She taught them steps she had learned: how to document financial abuse, how to safeguard accounts, how to recognize manipulation before it escalated. She never spoke of Rowan with bitterness, only truth. "He made choices," she would say. "I made mine." The director eventually asked her to help lead a new workshop on elder empowerment. Helen agreed. It felt natural, like stepping into a role she was destined for only after walking through the fire. And with each woman she helped, her own strength rooted deeper. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, Helen returned to the river at sunset. She wore a soft lavender blouse, her arm no longer in pain, though the faint ache remained, a reminder, not a punishment. The sky shifted from pink to gold to deep violet, reflecting on the water like a painting from heaven. She whispered softly, "I survived." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but gratitude. The worst moment of her life had broken a bone, but rebuilt her spirit. She thought of Rowan again, not with anger, but with distance. "I hope he find himself," she murmured. "But I won't lose myself again." Helen Carver stood, lifting her face to the evening breeze. She felt strong, grounded, unbreakable. The titanium plate in her arm would always remind her of that terrible day, but also of the day she reclaimed her life. She had lost a son to greed, but she had gained herself. And she would never give that up again. As she walked home, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. She wasn't lonely. She wasn't afraid. She had boundaries, purpose, and peace. She had a community of women who understood her and friends who stood by her. And in choosing not to give her son money, she had bought something far more precious: her soul. Helen smiled softly,